When I was young, there was an amazing publication called the Whole Earth Catalog, which was one of the Bibles of my generation.
The Whole Earth Catalog is legendary. It was Google 35 years before Google came along. In its final 1974 issue, it inspired many with the farewell message of
"Stay hungry, stay foolish."
But it's the original vision behind the publication and its founder, Stuart Brand, that inspires our story today. In 1966, he became convinced that seeing an image of Earth would change how we think about the planet and ourselves. He spearheaded what would become a successful grassroots campaign to get NASA to release an image of the entire Earth as seen from space. A year later, the satellite ATS-3 captured the epic photo, which would adorn the cover of the first edition of the Whole Earth Catalog in the fall of 1968. It would become the symbol behind the catalog, which would inspire the generation who went on to change the world. When researching for this video, I couldn't help but draw comparisons between Stuart Brand and the subject of our story today. Both operate at the most cutting-edge thing of the day, both living through eras defined by great division and tumult, where uncertainty and change were constant, and where a spirit of innovation promised better days ahead. Like Brand, Jason takes the longer view, and he pursues work not because of any promise of monetary gain, but because of the potential impact it might have on society.
You know, some people's job is to try and fix the present. I feel like my inspiration and where all these things I'm trying to do are to inspire the future. You know, we're going to space. We're hearing sounds from Mars. We're going to be seeing people walking on the moon again in our lifetime. You know, we're going to see people walking on Mars in our lifetime. Like this is magic.
This is Jason Achilles, a musician, composer, and most recently a space pioneer. His company is Zandef Deksit, a name with no meaning, and an organization with no real business model. He spearheaded a study for the program that led to the first recorded sounds from the surface of Mars. And with his latest project, he aims to capture video, which just may become a powerful new symbol for the next generation of space pioneers.
Yeah, what do? I don't know. I just want to like play in a rock and roll band and send cool shit to space. That's like the short version.
Never been done before, and it's rad.
In the past couple of years, we've witnessed some of the most incredible achievements in space exploration since humans first landed on the moon. In February of 2021, we saw Perseverance rover make an incredible landing on Mars.
The end of past life.
The James Webb Telescope only a few months ago gave us a deeper look into the universe than ever before. And now the Artemis project is set to kick off, with the goal of sending humans back to the moon. And not just for a photo op, but to establish a permanent presence. This all points to the fact that we are pushing further into space at a pace and scope that is unmatched in human history. And it's not just NASA at the helm, but private enterprise. What's emerging is a new space economy, buoyed by NASA but powered by small nimble companies and sometimes even individuals with an itch for outsized impact.
Yeah, everything came to a point, you know, at the right time. Space and music and orchestral music and rock and roll all kind of merged. Having an opportunity to work with JPL, to capture those first sounds on Mars the timing was it was perfect. It really, I feel very fortunate.
Jason has spent most of his career as a Los Angeles-based rock musician, playing for his fair share of bands and producing music for himself and other well-known acts. You can say in recent years he's finally found his groove, and in the process his music has evolved into something you can call a sort of cosmic space rock. It's a fitting description because at the same time that his music is coming into its own, his career in space is beginning to take shape. As these things do, it began over drinks in 2016. Jason was talking with a buddy who worked in robotics at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and the topic of sound was brought up. Would it be possible to mount a microphone on the upcoming Perseverance lander to capture the oral drama that would accompany NASA's video feed? A cool concept, and a fortunate stroke of serendipity, since the agency was considering how to do just that. So he did what any aspiring space pioneer would do. He began to formulate a plan to cold call the important and busy folks at NASA. His intuition and audacity would lead to an extraordinary series of events.
It was an interesting confluence of a strong desire on my part and timing on when the mission was going to go, and obviously my audio background helped. it was weird, man. When I heard that they were planning to fly this microphone, I felt like it was my job to lose.
What gave you the confidence?
Nothing left to lose. I just wanted it so badly, and it was like, what's the worst they tell me to screw off, ruin my non-existent space career, you know? Like, literally nothing to lose, you know? Which is funny because I've tried to apply that more to music now, because with music, you know, I've been doing it forever, and you know, you hear all these horror stories about, oh, if you say this thing to the wrong person, you'll never work in this town again. I was like, I'm already not working in this town, so it really doesn't matter.
The Martian surface has a different chemical composition and lower atmospheric pressure than Earth, which presents unique opportunities for learning how sound waves behave there. In other words, there's a scientific purpose behind the mic, and it wouldn't be the first time that NASA investigated and attempted the feat. There was a mic on the Mars Polar Lander in 1999, but that had a failed landing. And there was one on the 2008 Phoenix lander, but it was never turned on. Given his audio background and a sense of destiny, Jason leaned into the challenge. He hired an expert consultant on his own dime, authored an initial study, and began sending cold proposals to the agency. It was the summer of 2016, and while on a North American tour promoting his first solo release, Jason got the call from a high-ranking official for the Perseverance rover. His dogged pursuit had catapulted him into a rendezvous with NASA.
I had a meeting with Dave Gruhl, who became our supervisor at JPL, and he said, okay, well, it sounds like you guys know what you're doing, and we need somebody, so you got the job, you know, basically. Like, what? And then he says, well, do you have a company so I can hire you? And I said, well, no, I'm just me. He says, all right, well, go start a company, and then let me know when you got that. I'm like, okay. So I was on tour. I was on tour in the East Coast with my band at the time, and then we had a West Coast tour right after, like, not fancy at all. Like, you know, we were sleeping on people's couches, and, you know. And so I had to file my company, and I needed a company name really quickly, and every good thing I could think of was taken. I just couldn't think of a damn thing. And so I hit up my buddy at NASA, at JPL, who had sort of, you know, helped me make that pitch in the first place. The same guy I was talking to about the microphone, all that stuff, and I said, hey man, I need a company name. He's like, when? I'm like, now. And he's like, well, what about this or this? I'm like, no, I tried all those. Everything's taken. There's nothing good. And then he says, okay, what about Zandef Deksit? And I read it. I'm like, okay, why not? And then I asked him later, what the heck was that? And he said, I don't know, I just made it up. It was just garbage. But it kind of, there's a bit of a nod to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in there. So it's, yeah, Zandef Deksit means nothing.
Designing a microphone that will work on a planet nearly 300 million miles away is no small task. The mechanics and materials of the microphones are affected by the atmosphere they work in, which presents obvious challenges given the unique situation on Mars. The mic would also have to survive the trip over in a vacuum. Suffice it to say, there were many factors and considerations that would go into making the design selections, including cost. And so Jason was actually hired twice. Initially, he and Zandef Deksit were tasked with selecting a microphone capsule and designing a custom pre-amplification system that would fit into a 1-inch cube. After about 2 months of work, they came up with a rough design, which was submitted to NASA. Being that this project would be a non-mission critical tech demonstration, the custom solution would prove to be too expensive. So 4 months later, Jason was asked to come back in order to identify an off-the-shelf component requiring little, if any, customization. This study led to the microphone that flew to the Red Planet, and which continues to work today, a year and a half later.
This is a DPA 4006 capsule and MMA preamp, and this is exactly what flew on Perseverance. There's a little bit of customization on the capsule end. These little brackets were part of the mounting structure and how it went on to Perseverance, and there's also an extra layer of dust protection on here because, you know, it's being left in the desert, basically.
I forgot to ask you, what did it feel like when you heard this first sound?
Oh man, that was but it was mostly relief, yeah.
The successful landing of Perseverance marked a seminal moment in Jason's career. All the hard work and late nights finally paid off. His name would be etched in history, the lead investigator for a project that brought us our first sounds from the Red Planet. But just as the exhilaration began to wane, it became clear that his space career might be over just as quickly as it began. The landing of Perseverance meant that his official engagement with NASA was effectively done.
The way Exocam came about is while we were working on the microphone project, which started in 2017, basically I knew that the date that Perseverance landed, my job was done, you know, under the contract. And I didn't want my space career to end. You know, basically, when I started working on this stuff and I was, you know, going on tour while I'm, you know, doing this space research, and that was the happiest I'd been in my adult life ever. I'm like, I don't want this to end. That's when I started developing Exocam. And Exocam came from the same conversation as the Mars microphone. So basically, a couple of years later, I started meeting some people in the aerospace world, and I started kicking this idea around, and to my continual surprise, not that many people thought it was, well, they thought it was crazy, but they didn't think it was impossible.
We did meet through a mutual friend at the RAND Corporation. She introduced us, and he came to visit us at the Aerospace Corporation. We just sat around the cafeteria, he and I, another colleague of mine, Tom Heinzheimer, and he had this crazy idea for ejecting these basically video balls off a rocket. And we said, well, why would you want to do that? And he had some pretty good answers. This is the first time anybody's ever ejected video cameras off of a launch vehicle like this, right? So the Exocam is a first of its kind, and today is the first event. So I'm excited about seeing it.
It started out as a proverbial back-of-napkin sketch. The concept was for a remotely controlled camera system to record rockets landing on the moon and other worlds. For Jason, not only would it be incredibly cool to record a landing from the surface of another planet, but it turns out there's scientific benefit behind it. Again, NASA isn't in the business of attaching payloads to multi-billion-dollar rovers simply for the cool factor. And in the case of Exocam, there's keen interest in measuring the characteristics of regolith particles kicked up by lander's rocket plume as it touched down on the surface of the moon. When Jason heard about NASA's Flight Opportunity Program, it provided the opening he was looking for. He applied and received a grant through this program, which enabled him to build the team and form the partnerships needed to turn the idea into a reality. This would become the Lunar Exocam project.
Yeah, so basically we partnered with Maston Space Systems, Honeybee Robotics, Arizona State University, and a few others, and submitted a grant application with my company leading the grant. And we were awarded the grant back in the middle of the pandemic. So my pandemic experience was wonderful because I got to catch up with all my music stuff I'd been behind on, and then I got to start developing this camera for flight. And then October 2021, we went out to Maston and spent 2 weeks out there in the desert with those guys, and then strapped our camera to the rocket, flew it about 80 feet in the air, ejected it, and it like bullseyed the target, got all the footage. It was a big success. It was awesome.
All right, here we go. Mass knocks to all, 6-second count, engine start. 6, 5, 4.
This is groundbreaking with the Exocam and the ejectable, and as Ruben points out, it's never been done before. So this is a little bit of history right here in the making. And it's rad.
This is one of the 2 Exocam modules that we actually flew on a rocket, and if you look at it sideways, you'll see it's really flat. That's where it impacted the ground. So this used to be a nice sphere, and if you look close to it, it's kind of still covered with dust from the desert. So yeah, so for the flight test, we just used a GoPro Max, which is a 360 GoPro camera. You can see the lenses there. And then these little gold discs are a custom designed particle sensor system that was built by kids at Arizona State University. And that's actually why we got funded for this, was because when a rocket comes down on the lunar surface, it's going to eject a crazy amount of regolith, which is lunar dust, in like all directions. And that behavior needs to be well understood and modeled to inform future lunar missions. And so what this does is this can actually land in the dust cloud before it even starts and take direct measurements of these particles impacting this object. And so from that, it can help them build computer models and figure out where to safely land and that sort of thing. So that's why we got our grant funding. Actually was not even because of the camera. It was because the particle system. So sometimes in order to get cool pictures of stuff, you just have to do good science. I got excited about space at an early age by, Star Trek movies and by looking through a telescope and seeing Jupiter, and it was like the size of a marble. Like, holy crap, that's real. Like, you could see it, That's what Exocam is about like just showing people these things they've never seen before, and like, look, this is accessible now. This was, when I was a kid, this was a pipe dream. Now this is accessible for you guys. Do it.
Throughout the process of piecing together the story, I had a nagging urge to discover the aha moment, the person, experience, or event that was responsible for Jason's radical career pivot. I simply wanted a clear explanation for how a musician could simply decide one day to collaborate with NASA on a Mars project, and then actually make it happen. I think it's just human nature. We tell ourselves stories about who we are and what we're capable of. We look for neat patterns to explain how someone can get from A to B. It's an innate desire to comprehend accomplishment, in the hope that maybe we too can follow the neat recipe. But I think it's not always about looking back in order to connect the dots. Sometimes it's a burning desire to march confidently forward, following our inner sense of purpose and destiny. In this way, I think it's people like Jason that remind us of what an incredible moment we're living in, how achievement lies within all of us.
There's no reason some young girl or boy can't do any of this stuff. It's all here, and here. Actually, it starts here. This part you can work out, but it's got to be here. If you don't feel it here, that's tough. But as long as you feel it here, you can teach yourself these things. I taught myself all these things just because I wanted to. The more mankind is in tune with science and how it shows us the wonders of the universe, the better off we're going to be.
That's all I got.
That's all I got. We're out.